Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an interesting update on a recording that we talked about rather recently, although if this is the year 2753, then it wasn't so recent, so it doesn't really matter. But here is the update in question. Rachmaninoff, complete works for piano and orchestra with Abby Simon and the St. Louis Symphony, conducted by Leonard Slatkin on Vox. Now, this has always been a very highly regarded cycle of Rachmaninoff piano works, and recently Naxos reissued Concerti numbers 2 and 3. 1, 4, and the Paganini Rhapsody are, as of yet, hanging in limbo. But I noticed, looking at Amazon and whatnot, that the original Vox box, the 2 CD Vox box, is still available, and it's very inexpensive and fairly easy to find, which leads me to ask the question, what's going on? Like, how many of these things are there out there circulating? I think there must be tons of them just sitting around in remainder bins or at used bookstores or in other places. I don't know if this is still being manufactured as it was, or who's doing it, or who licensed it, or who has the rights to it. I mean, it's a really interesting question to which I don't have an answer. But I did want to point out that for those of you who want the complete cycle, and if you want one, you should want the other, this is still there. It's out there and still worth having. I mean, Abby Simon was a pianist's pianist, not the guy with the most flash or the biggest career, but he was a superbly sensitive artist, and he was very, very effective in the big romantic showpieces like the Rachmaninoff Concerti. Leonard Slatkin, of course, is one of the great Rachmaninoff conductors of all time. He really is. His first Rachmaninoff cycle was very, very fine, and this cycle of music for piano and orchestra is one of the best ones out there. It really is. It's up there with Zoltan Kocis and, other famous people. And it's better than a lot of the more famous people. So it's definitely worth hearing. I grew up partly grew up. I mean, one of my earlier, let's put it this way, because I had a bunch of them, versions, particularly of the Paganini, that's the word, Paganini Rhapsody. There was this one, and it still sounds absolutely splendid. It's beautiful. I mean, but they're all very, very fine performances. It just fascinates me that, the state of the industry is such that we really have no idea who has what and what's coming when. That really is remarkable. But there was another thought that sort of struck me on looking at this thing, and that's this. The movement of much of the repertoire to streaming media is kind of the great equalizer in terms of our perception of performances. Let me tell, for those of you who are newer to classical music or much younger than I am, I'm in my 60s, the way things used to be was that there were price levels of physical product, of records, LPs, and vinyl. And Vox was the cheapy super budget option for people who wanted the most music for the least amount of money. Their pressings were kind of grotty. They packaged things in cheap paper sleeves. The cover art was hideous. Some of the recordings were outstanding. We've always known, all of us in this universe, that there is not necessarily a relationship between price and quality of performance. Naxos, which now owns Vox, proved that. They proved that by making budget-priced material that was as good as anything the majors were doing. So often is not. And so just because you were a big name artist on a major label didn't mean that your performance was any better than anyone else's. It used to mean more when I was younger than it does today, particularly because the quality of the second tier orchestras and ensembles and artists, I mean, none of them are second tier, you know what I mean, it's just gotten higher and higher. And so it's more true now than it ever was. But even back then, even back in the 60s when I was starting out, you could get really outstanding stuff for very little money, as often as not. And there was also a lot more interesting repertoire on these cheap or budget labels because they were filling in the niches that the major labels weren't bothering with because they didn't see the money and because the name artists weren't doing the repertoire. So that was sort of the situation. But now with everything streaming, it's made everything more democratic because we're not conscious of the price factor at all. A performance that's on a website, a streaming site, is the same as any other performance on any other streaming website. There's no advantage in packaging. There's no luxury aspect to it. You don't get beautiful liner notes. You don't get beautiful album covers. You don't get, extra stuff that made some of the premium priced product premium. Now it's all just digibits. And one digibit is the same as the next digibit. And so people will discover these works in performances by complete non-entities, by no-name people. Artists don't matter as much as they used to. It's a fascinating phenomenon. And I'm really, really curious to see how it works out. In some cases, such as this, people might discover Abby Simon and Slatkin in St. Louis and Rachmaninoff, who might have naturally gravitated towards some high-priced competitor that's not as good. On the other hand, there's a lot of dreck, an awful lot, and people might not care because they just want to hear, say, Beethoven's Fifth, and they don't care who's doing it as long as it sounds like da-da-da-da, and they all sound the same. So there's that aspect of it too. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. But I think this democratization of the repertoire and recordings is going to be a very interesting phenomenon to track because there is no more quality image for these hoity-toity major labels or independent labels. And unless the artist has unbelievable name recognition, it's not going to matter who's playing the music. That's what I was thinking of as I was looking at this. I mean, I know that's a huge digression, but I just think it's an interesting point. And as I said, these are available. I don't think you'd have trouble sourcing them if that's what you want, and if you're intrigued. So you should think about that as well, especially if price is a factor. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.